order. Okay, you guys are good to go.
All right. Mayor, just wanted to touch on a couple of things. One, it's been 24 hours now after the announcement by yourself and the chief. Any further thoughts about what has transpired, the conversations that you're having at City Hall in the wake of her departure?
You know, Chris, I'm really hoping that there is a reset here and that we can come together to collaborate on the really pressing issues that we have right now. You know, we've talked about it before, but our city has never faced this array of challenges with the global pandemic that's getting worse, a worsening economic scene, a civil rights reckoning. And then we have some really big city infrastructure things, not just the West Seattle Bridge, but this week we found that part of the waterfront is failing. And so at this time, more than any other time, I think people need to see that government can work together. And I'm hoping we can do that we can find ways to collaborate and move forward on all fronts. I will say, I'm going to miss Carmen best. I think she was the right police chief at this moment in time for Seattle. And I think it's just an enormous loss for the people of Seattle that she won't be chief.
And for people who didn't see it yesterday, you said you have no plans at this time to launch a national search for her replacement.
No, I don't think a search at this time would be successful for a number of reasons. One, the main thing is Seattle is a city that deserves to have the absolute best applicants, and I don't think we would draw that right now. Unfortunately, you have one of the most nationally known and respected police chiefs resigned because of the political difficulties with city council and the lack of the ability to collaborate to move forward. I think it would be difficult for other people to think they could walk in there and do a better job than Carmen Best did on that front. I think also there's the real fact that we don't know what this police department's going to look like at the end of this next budget season for next year. And it would be unfair to ask people to apply for a job if they weren't sure what that job looked like.
And that transitions right into the budget discussions. There's going to be another discussion this afternoon in front of the city council as regards to your veto of the emergency relief bill. By all indications, it's believed the council will override your veto. I mean, where do you go from here?
So, I will continue to work with and collaborate with council, and I think we share the same values. Over the last 4 months, I've worked really hard, as has the executive staff, to provide direct COVID relief in a time where we've had just growing relief. We were able to stand up meals programs, food programs, grocery vouchers, rental assistance. We stopped evictions, and we've been able to marshal government to provide over $200 million in direct relief. We also know that the federal government hasn't stepped up like they should, and we want to be able to continue to provide the needed relief for COVID during this hard time for people. Unfortunately, we're also facing a bigger budget hole than we thought, which is one of the reasons that I had vetoed the legislation. We're now looking at a $50 million hole, $25 million for this year, $25 million for next year, on top of the $300 million hole we already have. And in that intervening time, we've also found out that one of the piers is failing. We had to take an interfund loan to build the West Seattle Bridge. So we've got a lot of competing needs right now. And I want to work with council to see how do we do that in a really responsible way together.
In terms of rough math, though, I mean, the 86 million that is would be pulled from the emergency funding from the rainy day fund. How would that work with the $337 million budget gap that you just described?
So the problem is if you pull the combination of the $86 million that they wanted to pull from both the emergency funds and the rainy day funds, together with the other spending that they've already authorized in the balancing package, takes us up close to the neighborhood of about $100 million. Now you can argue about which pot it comes from, but that's money we won't have next year when we're facing a $325 million hole. So the budget for next year, we're going to have to make more cuts. We want to protect, the services that people need in the city. We want to make sure that we do not cut human services for the people that need it most. And we want to make sure that we have the money to do the investments in the Black and communities of color so that we can really do that $100 million, which I think is essential to getting a strong community resilience, and listening to community about where that money can go. We have tough choices we're going to have to make, and we can only make those choices in the best way if we pull together and try to find some ways to collaborate.
Yeah, what should people brace for in terms of potential cuts? Because this is the numbers that you're describing are unprecedented in recent Seattle history, going back to the McGinn administration a decade ago. This dwarfs that number, depending on what term you want to look at, a year or 2 years. It was 120 million over 2 years. This is a significantly higher number. So what should people brace for?
So they should brace for a lot. The whole this year was about 325 million, and that'll be about the whole next year. This year, we were able to close a lot of that gap by seeing it coming, freezing spending, being really fiscally frugal, by not cutting, key resources because we don't want an austerity budget. But we also were very fortunate because early on in COVID, we saw what was happening, and we're able to get our delegation to insert into the first bill direct money coming to the city of Seattle. And that lobbying that we did as the city, that we were able, talking with the delegation, gave us a cushion so that we actually had money to spend on direct COVID relief that we needed, and the ability to cushion some of this loss. We don't know that we'll have that next year. So we have to make it up in other ways, and that's going to mean probably furloughs or layoffs. And those are really tough choices because everybody working in the city of Seattle is providing essential services for the residents and businesses. And we know that, unfortunately, COVID's getting worse, and the experts believe that we will be in some kind of restrictions for COVID at least into midtime next year and maybe through the end of next year and into 2022. If that's the case, our ability to recover on the revenue front as a government is going to be limited because our businesses and our workers aren't going to be going back to work like we need them to.
So how do you pay for the West Seattle Bridge fixes? How do you pay for those waterfront fixes?
We are looking at, so West Seattle Bridge will do a combination of things. We can do an interfund loan that we can actually pay back with some revenues we're getting in. I've been talking nonstop, almost with my silver cup out, to the governor, to our congressional delegation. I'm still hopeful that we can have it as one of the mega projects that can be in an infrastructure project. And we will be looking at all resources. Declaring the civil emergency that I did for the West Seattle Bridge helps us unlock maybe some funding at the state level next session that we would not have been eligible for otherwise. So we will be looking for every resource we can. The city of Seattle will not be able to do it on its own, but it is one of the most urgent corridors. I've talked to the Port of Seattle about it in their delegation because without the West Seattle Bridge, we start impacting critical freight corridor routes that are important for the whole state and in fact the whole region. And if we can demonstrate that, I think we can see that it'll benefit the region and hopefully have a better chance back in Washington, D.C. of getting us some of the funds that we need for the bridge.
Okay, a couple more final questions because I know you got to run. A bit of a good news, bad news situation. REI today announced that they are looking to sell their brand new headquarters in Bellevue that was built because one of the factors cited is work from home and efficiencies for employees. They're going to fold some of those employees into Seattle. So there is some good news there for the city of Seattle, but the overall picture is that here's one of the larger companies in the area that's downsizing their office space because of the new dynamic with working. Are you concerned at all about a company like that making that move, knowing that there's so much office space in Seattle?
Chris, I'm deeply concerned. Zillow announced just a few weeks ago that it will let its employees work from home indefinitely. And as we know, they're one of the key tenants in one of the main buildings downtown. We know that Apple and Facebook and Google have their employees working from home at least through the end of this year and probably into the spring next year. It is going to be really difficult for our downtown core to recover if we don't have the workers coming back to our downtown core. And so every time I see one of these companies adjusting and right-sizing, I know that it affects our economy. You look at what Boeing's doing, for example, and the threat that they may move one of their lines. All of that ripples through our region in a really concrete way. And we know we are in for a really tough time in Seattle. Our economy is going to continue to weaken in ways that aren't any fault of ours. It is the effect of COVID. But we also have to be taking steps so that when we come out from under COVID, we're as ready as we can be. So I'm pushing, for example, to see if we can get alternative financing for the convention center and help there. Because if we can get the convention center built, once people are done with COVID, they're going to be ready to travel. And we want to be one of those cities that they travel to. So we've got to keep moving forward on some of these critical infrastructure bills at the same time that we help the small businesses that are barely hanging on. I talked to small business owners, and it was almost impossible to get through COVID. If we have to dial backwards again, it will kill a lot of businesses. It's one reason I'm really working with the governor and the county executive to take other alternatives before we do another stay-home order, because I think we both need it because we're social beings to come together, but also our economy needs to have as much resilience as possible. And right now it's getting harder and harder.
Okay, last question, because I know you got to run. Your housing announcement here in mere minutes, what's that all about?
So it's a really exciting thing. We continue to move forward knowing that affordable housing is one of the critical things that we lack in our region. We're going to be announcing a number of projects, but one of the really exciting things that we're doing is looking at new ways of building those projects so we bring the cost down. It's been about $350,000 a unit in 2 years to build. We'll never get in front of the need for affordable housing. So we'll be introducing a couple of projects that are based on some new building techniques that will be able to bring it online quicker and provide that critical permanent supportive housing, which we need in order to move people out of homelessness and get them the stability that they need.
Okay, I'll leave it at that since I know you got to run. It's in a few minutes, so. And
All
I'm
right.
getting the wrap from Chelsea, so.
All right, I apologize. I was late, Chelsea. It was my fault, not Chris's fault. Wait,